Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak to you about something that shapes our decisions, our relationships, and ultimately our lives, our emotions. I want to start today by talking about something that most people never fully grasp: the power of recognizing your emotional triggers. When it comes to controlling your emotions, this is the foundation. Without understanding what pushes you, you'll find yourself constantly reacting, constantly feeling overwhelmed by emotions that seem out of your control. The first step in taking control of your emotions is recognizing what causes them in the first place. Now let's break this down. It might seem simple, but truly understanding your triggers can be one of the most powerful tools in your emotional toolkit. A trigger is something that causes you to react, often in ways that aren't thought out or controlled. It could be something someone says, a situation you find yourself in, or even a feeling that's stirred up from past experience. Maybe it's something small like a comment at work or a text from a friend, or maybe it's a deeper issue, like an old insecurity or a fear you haven't fully dealt with. But what happens when these things trigger us is that they get under our skin, causing us to react without thinking. Let's take an example. You're sitting at home enjoying a peaceful evening when your phone pings with a message. You glance at it and instantly you feel your blood pressure rise. Someone said something in a way that rubs you the wrong way. Maybe it's a critique at work or a snide comment from someone who doesn't really know you. That feeling of irritation creeps in fast. You want to fire back, to defend yourself, to say something sharp. But here's the thing. This is the moment of choice. This is where you can either be reactive or you can take control. What most people do is they let those emotions flood them. They get swept away in the moment, and without thinking, send off that text or make that angry comment. Now you've reacted, and that reaction is going to shape the rest of your day, your mood, and maybe even your relationships. But it doesn't have to be that way. I'm going to tell you something that might sound a bit uncomfortable, but it's the truth. Your emotions are your responsibility. It's easy to blame others for how you feel, to say someone made you angry or upset. But here's the thing. Nobody can make you feel anything unless you let them. When you recognize your triggers, you take the power back. You're no longer at the mercy of other people or external situations. You decide how you're going to respond. So how do you recognize your triggers? It starts with being brutally honest with yourself. You need to pay attention to when emotions hit you hardest. What's the situation? Who are you with? What did they say? What did you feel? By being aware of these moments, you begin to map out your emotional landscape. You start to see patterns. This is where people miss the mark. They think it's just about being strong in the moment, when in reality, self-awareness is the real strength. When you recognize your triggers, you stop being a puppet to your emotions and you start to control the strings. Let's take another example. You're in a meeting at work and your boss criticizes your report. Instantly you feel defensive. You're ready to explain yourself, maybe even justify your work. But here's the thing. That defensiveness, that feeling of needing to prove yourself, is a trigger. It's something that if you're aware of it, you can handle before it escalates. You can take a deep breath and choose to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting with defensiveness. You can ask for clarification, listen to the feedback, and use it as an opportunity for growth. When you're aware of your triggers, you're not at their mercy. Instead of being controlled by your emotions, you control them. When something happens that would typically make you upset or angry, you have the space to pause and think before you react. You can assess the situation and make a decision that serves you better. And here's something that might surprise you. Recognizing your triggers can help you understand other people too. We're all walking around with our own set of triggers, and often the way people act or react is just a result of their own emotional trigger. If you can recognize that someone is triggered, you can respond with empathy instead of frustration. You don't have to take their reactions personally, because now you see the bigger picture. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, the old you might have reacted with anger or frustration. But with self-awareness, you realize that maybe that person is late for something important, or maybe they're just having a bad day. You don't need to take on their emotions. You can stay calm, let them go, and keep your peace. This doesn't mean you become a doormat or let people walk all over you. It means you realize that their triggers don't have to become your triggers. This process of understanding your triggers doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice, and it's something you have to commit to. The more you pay attention to your emotional reactions, the more you begin to see patterns. Maybe certain situations trigger your anger, others trigger anxiety, and some trigger feelings of inadequacy. Once you know what they are, you can begin to challenge them. You can ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? Is this response really necessary, or is it based on past experiences that don't apply to this situation? You start to break the habit of reacting impulsively and instead develop the skill of responding thoughtfully. I'm going to be blunt. People who let their emotions control them are not in control of their lives. When you react emotionally, you lose power. But when you take the time to recognize your triggers, when you learn how to respond instead of react, you are taking control of your life. So I challenge you to start today. Start paying attention to your emotions. When you feel something strong, ask yourself, what triggered this? Why am I feeling this way? Don't brush it off. Don't ignore it. Recognize it, understand it, and then decide how you want to respond. The more you do this, the more in control you'll be. And trust me, once you gain control over your emotions, you'll start seeing a shift, not just in how you react, but in how you live. Now I want to talk about something that could change everything for you: pausing before you react. This is a skill that's often overlooked, but it's probably the most powerful thing you can learn to master when it comes to controlling your emotions. We've all been there, right? Something happens, someone cuts you off in traffic, you get a critical comment at work, or you're in an argument and before you know it, your emotions have taken over. You feel yourself getting worked up, maybe your heart starts racing, and your first instinct is to just react. You want to speak your mind, defend yourself, or say something that will put the other person in their place. But here's the reality: reacting in the heat of the moment is a recipe for disaster. Now think about this. How many times have you acted impulsively, only to regret it later? I know I've done it. We all have. We lash out, we say things we don't mean, and we do things we wish we could take back. And why? Because we didn't pause. We didn't give ourselves that crucial moment to step back, think, and choose how we wanted to respond. We just let the emotion take over. And let's face it, our emotions are not always the most reliable guides. They can trick us into thinking we're right, that we need to defend ourselves, or that we should get even. But if you want to truly control your emotions, you have to learn to pause before you react. When something happens, whether it's an insult, a setback, or a frustrating situation, you feel that instant rush of emotion. It's almost like a reflex. You don't have to think about it, it just happens. But in that moment, you have a choice. You can either act on that impulse, or you can stop and ask yourself, is this really the way I want to respond? Is reacting right now going to serve me, or is it going to make things worse? This is where the power of pausing comes in. Let's be clear, it's not about suppressing your emotion. It's about giving yourself the time and space to process what's happening before you decide how to respond. The more you practice this, the better you get at it. In fact, you'll find that once you develop this ability, your emotional control will improve in every area of your life. Think about a time when you were in a conversation and someone said something that really bothered you. Maybe it was a comment about your work, your appearance, or something else personal. In the past, you might have immediately fired back with a sharp response, or maybe even stormed off. But what happens when you take that moment to pause before reacting? When you give yourself that small window to breathe, to collect your thoughts, you realize that your first reaction might not be the best one. Maybe the person didn't mean to offend you, maybe they were having a bad day. Maybe, just maybe, you don't need to engage in the conflict at all. I want to emphasize this point. The pause doesn't just stop you from saying something you might regret. It gives you the chance to make a better decision. Think about it. If you react immediately, you're acting out of instinct, out of the emotional state you're in at that moment. But when you pause, you allow yourself to step out of that emotional state and into a place of rational thinking. You give yourself the opportunity to see the bigger picture, to consider the long-term consequences of your actions, and to choose the response that will benefit you the most in the long run. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a heated meeting at work, and someone criticizes your idea. Your first reaction is likely to feel defensive, right? You're probably going to think, that's not fair, or they don't know what they're talking about. You might even be tempted to argue back, to make your point forceful. But in that moment, if you can pause, you'll realize that there's a better way to handle the situation. Instead of reacting in anger, you could take a breath and respond calmly, asking for more details or clarification about the feedback. You could even use the opportunity to learn something valuable. By pausing, you avoid turning the situation into a confrontation and instead turn it into a chance for growth and understanding. And here's another benefit of pausing. It gives you emotional space. In today's world, everything is moving fast. People want everything now, and we're expected to react quickly to everything. But taking a pause gives you a moment to step back and remember that you don't have to respond instantly. It's okay to take a beat, to gather your thoughts, and to act with intention, rather than being swept away by the emotions of the moment. When you do this consistently, you'll find that your emotional responses become more measured and more controlled. But don't get me wrong, it's not always easy. It requires discipline. It requires a certain level of self-control to not immediately react when your emotions are high. But it's something that you can develop over time,
And the beauty of it is, the more you practice, the more it becomes second nature. Eventually, pausing will become part of your instinct. It will be the natural response, rather than the emotional reaction. You'll find yourself in situations where instead of lashing out, you pause, reflect, and make a more informed decision about how you want to proceed. In fact, this is one of the key things that separates those who are truly in control of their lives from those who let their emotions run the show. When you pause before reacting, you assert control over your emotional state. You no longer let the situation dictate how you feel. Instead, you choose how to feel, how to respond, and how to move forward. That's power. That's true emotional control. Now, don't misunderstand me. This doesn't mean you're weak or passive. Some people think that taking a moment to pause means you're not standing up for yourself, or that you're letting others walk all over you. But that's not the case at all. Pausing actually gives you more strength. It gives you more power because it allows you to respond with clarity and purpose, not just knee-jerk emotion. It lets you handle the situation in the way that is most effective, rather than reacting out of frustration or anger. So I challenge you, the next time something happens that triggers an emotional response, pause, take a breath, step back, and give yourself that moment to think. Is your emotional reaction really helping you? Or could you respond in a way that serves you better, in a way that shows strength, not weakness? Start practicing this today, and I promise you'll see a difference.
Now let's talk about something crucial to understanding how we handle our emotions, and that is the fact that emotions are temporary. This is one of the most empowering realizations you can have. If you can truly internalize the idea that emotions are not permanent, you will find yourself in a position of strength. Too many people get caught up in the intensity of their emotions, thinking that because they feel a certain way in the moment, that feeling will define them forever. The truth is, emotions are fleeting, and if you recognize this, you can stop them from controlling you. Think about it for a second. How many times have you felt something so deeply, whether it's anger, sadness, frustration, or even intense happiness, and it felt like it would never end? In those moments, it's easy to think that how we feel right now is how we'll always feel. If you're upset, you start thinking, I'm always going to feel like this. This is who I am now. If you're angry, you might feel like that anger will consume you and stay with you forever. Here's the reality. It won't. In fact, it can't. Emotions are like waves. They rise, they crest, and they eventually fall. The intensity of what you're feeling now will eventually pass, and when you understand this, you can stop yourself from being overwhelmed by your emotions. When you accept that emotions are temporary, you gain control over them. The next time something triggers your anger or sadness, instead of letting it consume you, you can remind yourself that this too shall pass. That's not to say your emotions are not valid or that you shouldn't feel. Feeling your emotions is essential to being human. But the key is to understand that no matter how powerful or overwhelming they may seem in the moment, they are just that, moments. They don't last forever, and knowing this allows you to manage them instead of letting them manage you. Let's take an example. You're in a heated argument with someone, and your anger is building. You feel like you're right, and you feel like you need to make the other person see that. In the middle of the argument, it's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment. You might even say things you don't mean, things that only make the situation worse. But if you can remind yourself that this anger is just temporary, you'll find the strength to step back from it. The argument doesn't need to escalate. You don't need to let that moment dictate how the rest of your day or even your life unfolds. If you let your anger pass, you will still have control over the situation, and you'll be able to move on from it faster. This is a powerful tool for personal growth. We've all had moments where we let our emotions dictate our actions, and it's often in those moments that we make the biggest mistakes. Think about it. When you're angry or upset, your judgment is clouded. You might lash out in a way you'll regret later, or make a decision in a rush that you'll later realize wasn't the best choice. But when you recognize that your emotions are temporary, you begin to understand that you don't have to make permanent decisions based on temporary feeling. You can pause, let the intensity of the emotion pass, and then approach the situation with a clear mind and a calm demeanor. For instance, let's say you've had a bad day at work and everything seems to be going wrong. Maybe you feel frustrated or defeated, and your mind starts spiraling, thinking that nothing ever goes right, that you're stuck in a cycle of failure. In that moment, you might feel like everything is falling apart, and the weight of that frustration feels heavy. But remember this, that frustration is temporary. It's a passing emotion. The challenges you face today won't last forever. Once you give yourself the time to process it, to take a step back and gain some perspective, you'll find that the frustration fades. It doesn't define you, and it won't shape your future unless you allow it to. Here's the secret. The more you practice reminding yourself that emotions are temporary, the more in control you become. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you can approach each emotional experience with the knowledge that it will pass. You can acknowledge the emotion, but you don't need to let it define you or dictate your behavior. For example, if you feel anxious before a big presentation or meeting, you can acknowledge that anxiety and let it flow through you, knowing that it's temporary. By doing so, you give yourself the freedom to perform better, without the weight of that anxiety dragging you down. It's important to note that this doesn't mean you ignore or suppress your emotions. Suppression is dangerous because it only leads to more emotional buildup, and eventually that pressure will cause an eruption. What I'm talking about is accepting that your emotions are a natural part of being human, but also recognizing that they don't have to control you. By doing this, you create space for yourself to make more rational decisions, to take action from a place of calm rather than chaos. Let's take a closer look at how this works. Let's say you're feeling overwhelmed by a situation, maybe it's a personal issue or something in your career. It's easy to get lost in the emotion and start thinking that you'll never get out of the hole, that it's all too much to handle. But when you understand that your emotions are temporary, you realize that you don't have to make any permanent decisions while you're in the emotional storm. You can wait for the storm to pass. This is powerful because it allows you to keep your mind clear and your actions deliberate, instead of acting impulsively out of fear or frustration. It's also important to recognize that emotions don't define who you are. Too often, people let their emotions become a part of their identity. They say things like, "I'm just an angry person," or "I'm always stressed out." But this is a misunderstanding of what emotions are. Emotions are not permanent states. They're temporary responses to what's happening around us. And when you understand this, you can start to separate your true self from the emotions you experience. You're not angry. You're just feeling anger in a particular moment. You're not sad. You're simply experiencing sadness. The more you see emotions as temporary visitors, the less power they have over you. So what's the key takeaway here? Your emotions are temporary. They may feel all-consuming in the moment, but they will pass. When you understand this, you gain control over them, and you stop letting them dictate your life. Instead of reacting to emotions, you can respond with clarity and calm, knowing that the emotion will eventually fade, and you'll be left with the opportunity to make the best decision moving forward. I want to touch on something that is incredibly powerful, and if you truly grasp it, it will change everything about how you handle your emotions. The importance of controlling your thoughts. Now, this might sound like a simple idea, but let me tell you, it is one of the most profound things you can do to gain emotional control. It's not just about having a positive mindset or thinking happy thoughts. It's about recognizing that your thoughts directly influence your emotions. And when you control your thoughts, you take control of how you feel. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself in a bad mood, feeling irritated, stressed, or upset, only to realize that it's your thoughts driving those emotions? Maybe you're thinking about something that happened in the past, dwelling on a mistake, or worrying about what's going to happen in the future. Whatever it is, the common denominator is that those thoughts are fueling your emotional state. Here's the catch, though. You don't have to let your thoughts control you. You have the power to control your thoughts, and when you master this, you can transform how you experience your emotions. Let's break it down. When you're caught up in negative thoughts, those thoughts create a kind of feedback loop. You think something like, "I can't do this," or "this situation is hopeless." Your emotions then follow suit. You start feeling defeated, stressed, or anxious. But here's the kicker. That whole cycle starts with your thoughts. You might think that your emotions are just happening to you, that you have no control over them. But in reality, the thoughts you choose to entertain are what shape your emotional reality. So how do you break that cycle? The first step is awareness. You need to start paying attention to what's going on in your mind. A lot of people go through life without ever noticing what they're thinking. But the more aware you become of your internal dialogue, the more power you have to change it. When you catch yourself thinking negative or disempowering thoughts, you can stop right there. You don't have to continue down that path. Instead of letting your thoughts spiral out of control, you can choose to challenge them. For example, let's say you're about to take on a big challenge, maybe a project at work or a presentation. Your mind might start running through a list of worries. What if I mess up? What if they don't like my idea? What if I fail? These thoughts immediately trigger feelings of anxiety or self-doubt. But here's the thing, you can choose to think differently. Instead of focusing on all the ways you could fail, you could choose to focus on how prepared you are. You could remind yourself of past successes, of times when you've overcome challenges before. You could decide to shift your thoughts from fear to confidence, from doubt to belief in your ability to succeed. The key to this is realizing that you are not your thought. You are the one who observes them. Your thoughts come and go, but your ability to choose which thoughts you give your attention to is what gives you the power to control your emotions. Think of your thoughts like passing clouds. Some clouds are dark and stormy, while others are light and fluffy. You don't have to let the dark clouds linger in your mind. You can acknowledge them and then move on to the next thought. The more you practice this, the more you'll notice how your emotional state begins to shift. Let's say you've had a disagreement with someone, and your mind keeps replaying the argument over and over again. You're reliving the moment, getting more and more frustrated, thinking of all the things you could have said, all the ways you could have defended yourself. But here's the thing, that loop of thoughts is only making you angrier. It's feeding your negative emotions. What if, instead of replaying that argument in your head, you chose to focus on something else? What if you decided to shift your attention to a solution, or even just to something positive in your life? By doing so, you're taking control of your thoughts,
and in turn, you're taking control of your emotional state. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. In fact, it takes practice. You've probably spent years, even decades, letting your thoughts run wild and unconsciously allowing them to dictate your emotions. But it is absolutely possible to break that pattern. The more you practice controlling your thoughts, the more natural it becomes. Over time, you'll develop a habit of thinking in ways that support your emotional well-being, rather than sabotaging it. Another way to control your thoughts is to practice mindfulness. This means staying present and aware of what's going on around you, rather than getting lost in your thoughts. When you're mindful, you're not ruminating on the past or worrying about the future. You're fully engaged in the present moment. And the more you can practice mindfulness, the more you can break free from the cycle of negative thinking. For instance, instead of letting your mind wander to a stressful thought during a meeting or while you're talking to someone, you can focus on the conversation at hand, on the task in front of you. It's in these small moments that you'll begin to notice a shift in your ability to control your emotional state. Here's the truth. You have the power to create your emotional experience by controlling your thought. It's not about pretending to be happy or forcing yourself to feel a certain way. It's about choosing thoughts that align with the person you want to be and the emotional state you want to maintain. If you want to be calm, choose thoughts that promote calmness. If you want to feel confident, choose thoughts that boost your self-belief. And if you want to feel peaceful, choose thoughts that bring you peace. Over time, you'll notice that your emotions begin to follow the direction of your thoughts, and you'll find yourself more and more in control. And here's something to remember. Controlling your thoughts is a lifelong practice. It's not something you do once and then forget about. It's a daily commitment. But the more you commit to it, the easier it becomes. You'll find that the more you control your thoughts, the more natural it feels, and the more you'll start to experience the emotional freedom that comes with it. The power is in your hands, and it always has been. So I challenge you to start today. The next time you find yourself feeling a strong emotion, pause and take a look at the thoughts that are fueling it. Are they thoughts that empower you, or are they thoughts that are holding you back? If it's the latter, choose to change them. Recognize that you have the power to think differently, and in doing so, you can take control of how you feel.
I want to talk about something that often gets overlooked when we discuss emotional control, but it's incredibly powerful. This is the idea that you must take responsibility for your emotional reactions. Now, what does that mean exactly? It means that when something happens, when you're triggered or upset, it's not the event or the person that's making you feel a certain way. It's your response to that situation that determines how you feel. Taking responsibility for your emotions is one of the most empowering steps you can take in life. It's about recognizing that you have the power at any given moment to control how you react. A lot of people don't realize this, and that's a problem. They think that other people, their circumstances, or the events around them are the things that cause their emotional states. But the reality is, emotions come from within. Your emotions are a product of how you choose to interpret the world and how you decide to react to it. If you let your emotions control you, you're essentially giving up your power. You're letting external factors dictate your internal world. But when you take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you take back your power. Let's look at a real-life example. Say you're in a meeting and someone says something you disagree with. Maybe they even criticize your work. In that moment, you might feel hurt, defensive, or angry. But if you really think about it, that feeling isn't coming from what they said. It's coming from your interpretation of what they said and your reaction to it. You could choose to take it personally and feel upset. You could choose to respond emotionally, to argue back, or to get defensive. But here's the thing. You have a choice. You could just as easily choose to respond differently. You could acknowledge the criticism without taking it to heart. You could recognize that the other person's opinion is just that, their opinion, and it doesn't have to affect your sense of self or your emotional state. This is where taking responsibility comes in. When you take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you stop blaming others or external events for how you feel. Instead, you realize that you are the one in control of how you react to everything that happens. You don't have to let someone else's words, actions, or energy dictate your mood. This is a huge shift in mindset, and it's something that can completely transform how you experience life. Think about it. If you're constantly blaming the outside world for how you feel, you're essentially giving away your power. You're saying, I can't be happy because of this person, or I'm angry because of what happened. But the truth is, you have the power to choose how you respond. When you stop blaming others, you regain that power. You take full responsibility for your emotions, and that's when you start to see real change. Here's the reality. Life is going to throw challenges your way. People will disappoint you, things will go wrong, and you won't always get the results you want. That's just life. But you don't have to let those challenges control your emotions. You don't have to let a difficult person, a frustrating situation, or a setback determine how you feel. You are the one who decides. When you take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you decide that no matter what happens, you will stay in control of how you respond. Let's dive deeper into this. Often when things go wrong, our instinct is to react with frustration, anger, or even despair. We want to blame someone or something,
But what if you could step outside of that reaction? What if instead of immediately reacting, you paused and asked yourself, how do I want to respond to this? In that moment, you've taken responsibility for how you feel. You're no longer letting the situation dictate your emotions. You're choosing your response, and that's where your power lies. I've seen this happen countless times. People who take responsibility for their emotions find themselves navigating life with much more ease. When you take control over your emotional reactions, you stop getting caught up in the drama of life. You stop letting every little thing affect you. Instead, you can move through life with a sense of calm and clarity, no matter what's going on around you. It's important to realize that taking responsibility for your emotions doesn't mean suppressing them. You're not pretending to feel happy when you're upset. You're simply choosing to acknowledge your feelings without letting them take over. It's about accepting that it's okay to feel anger, frustration, sadness, or any other emotion, but knowing that those emotions don't have to define you or control your actions. Here's another example. Let's say you're in a relationship, and your partner does something that bothers you. Maybe they forget something important to you, or they don't act the way you expected. In that moment, you might feel upset, maybe even betrayed. But here's the thing, instead of letting that feeling of frustration or anger spiral into a full-blown argument, you have the ability to take responsibility for how you feel. You can recognize that how you feel is your choice. You can decide whether to hold on to that negative emotion or whether to let it go and approach the situation calmly and rationally. Taking responsibility also means that when you do react emotionally, you own it. Instead of making excuses or blaming the other person, you say, I overreact. I let my emotions get the best of me. When you can take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you stop making excuses. You stop pointing fingers, and you start to grow. You begin to realize that every emotional reaction is an opportunity for self-awareness and self-improvement. Let me tell you something else. When you take responsibility for your emotional reactions, you also free yourself from the need for validation from others. You're not waiting for someone else to make you feel better or to apologize for their behavior. You don't need anyone else to control your emotions for you. You've taken full responsibility for how you feel, and that's incredibly empowering. You stop depending on external validation for your emotional stability, and you start creating that stability within yourself. This is a huge shift in mindset. It's about realizing that you have the power to control your emotional state at all times. It's about understanding that no matter what happens, no matter who says what, you are the one who decides how you react. And when you embrace that power, you begin to move through life with a sense of confidence and composure that most people only dream of. So let's summarize this. Taking responsibility for your emotional reactions means recognizing that your emotions come from how you choose to interpret the world and how you choose to respond. You stop blaming others for how you feel, and you start taking full ownership of your emotions. It's about choosing how you react, whether it's frustration, sadness, or joy. When you take responsibility, you regain control over your emotional life, and that's when you begin to live with true power. Now, I want to talk about a concept that is crucial for maintaining control over your emotions and living with purpose and strength. It's the idea of embracing discomfort and challenges. Now, I know that might sound counterintuitive to some of you. Why would anyone willingly choose to face discomfort, right? Who in their right mind would seek out challenges when they could live a comfortable life? But here's the thing, if you truly want to control your emotions, if you want to be someone who is not easily shaken, you need to get comfortable with discomfort. You need to understand that life isn't about avoiding challenges, but about stepping into them and using them as a means of growth. Life by its very nature is full of obstacles, difficulties, and moments that are uncomfortable. You will face rejection, failure, and tough situations. The people around you may disappoint you and things may not always go as planned. This is the reality we all face, and if you think you can avoid discomfort, you're only fooling yourself. What's more, those who try to avoid discomfort often end up trapped by it. They spend their lives trying to run away from challenges, only to find that they're stuck in a cycle of fear and insecurity. But those who embrace discomfort, who run towards the challenges, are the ones who grow and ultimately gain control over their emotions. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're facing a major setback. You've worked hard for something and it didn't work out. Maybe you failed an important exam, lost a job, or missed an opportunity. In that moment, it's easy to feel defeated, discouraged, or frustrated. Your emotions are all over the place, and it might feel like the world is against you. Now, most people would let those emotions control them. They would give up, wallow in their disappointment, or allow their failure to define them. But here's where embracing discomfort comes. Instead of letting those emotions take over, you choose to face them head on. You choose to look at the situation, accept it, and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What is this challenge teaching me? When you embrace discomfort, you stop seeing challenges as something to fear or avoid. You start seeing them as opportunities for growth, Challenges don't have to be something that breaks you down, they can be the very thing that builds you up. When you encounter difficult situations, you have a choice. You can either let them control you, or you can take control of how you respond. If you respond with strength, determination, and resilience, you turn discomfort into a stepping stone for progress. The more you do this, the more emotionally resilient you become. You stop being ruled by how you feel in the moment, and you start to see your emotions as temporary, fleeting, and manageable. But let's take this a step further. Think about how much growth happens when you face discomfort. The people who achieve the most, the ones who become leaders and who succeed in life, are not the ones who avoid discomfort. They're the ones who lean into it. It's the athlete who pushes through the pain to get stronger. It's the entrepreneur who faces rejection and failure time and time again but keeps going. It's the individual who confronts their fears instead of running from them. Every time you face a challenge and push through it, you become stronger, wiser, and more capable of handling whatever life throws your way. And as you build this mental and emotional resilience, your ability to control your emotions strengthens as well. You see, discomfort and challenge are a part of life. They don't have to be something that defeats you. When you choose to embrace them, they become a way for you to develop more control over your emotional state. Think about the last time you were in a tough situation. Maybe you were under pressure to meet a deadline, or perhaps you were dealing with a difficult person. How did you respond? Did you let the pressure get to you? Or did you rise to the occasion, using the discomfort as fuel to push forward and perform at your best? If you embrace discomfort, you'll find that the more you challenge yourself, the more emotionally stable you become. The more you put yourself in situations that force you to grow, the more you learn to manage your emotions effectively. You stop letting fear, anger, frustration, or anxiety control you because you've been through tough situations before and you know how to handle them. Every time you come through a challenge, you prove to yourself that you can handle whatever life throws your way. And that builds confidence, which is one of the key elements of emotional control. The reason why so many people struggle with their emotions is that they shy away from discomfort. They try to make their lives as easy as possible, and when challenges inevitably arise, they crumble. They don't have the emotional strength to handle the pressure, because they've never trained themselves to deal with discomfort. But when you embrace discomfort, you're building that emotional muscle. You're conditioning yourself to stay calm and composed when things get tough. You're teaching yourself to think clearly, act decisively, and not let your emotions derail you. Think about the military. What they do in training is exactly this. They put soldiers through extreme discomfort and challenge. Why? Because they know that when these soldiers are faced with real danger, they need to be able to keep their emotions in check. They need to be able to think logically and make clear decisions under pressure. And this is exactly what you're doing when you embrace discomfort in your own life. You're training yourself to face adversity with grace and strength. You're not letting the pressure crush you. You're using it to grow and become better. And this emotional strength is something that will serve you in every area of your life, from your career to your relationships to your personal development. Now let's talk about fear. Fear is a powerful emotion, and it often holds us back from embracing challenge. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being uncomfortable. But here's the thing, fear is natural. Everyone feels it. The key is not to avoid fear, but to move through it. When you face fear head on, you start to realize that it's not as powerful as it seems. You start to recognize that fear is just an emotion, one that can be controlled just like any other emotion. And when you embrace fear, when you push through it, you realize that it doesn't control you. You control it, and in doing so, you build an even greater level of emotional mastery. So what does it come down to? Embrace discomfort. It's not something to run from, it's something to lean into. Because it's in the discomfort that you'll find your true strength. Every challenge you face, every moment of discomfort, is an opportunity for you to grow. When you make the decision to face those moments with courage, clarity, and control, you develop the emotional resilience to handle anything. You stop being a slave to your emotions and you start becoming the master of them.